What if I told you that in a small town in Oregon, there lived a woman who discovered something so disturbing about the intelligence of crows that it drove her to complete madness? What if I told you that these birds didn't just remember her kindness, but began communicating with her in ways that defied everything we know about animal behavior? And what if I told you that the gifts they brought her weren't random trinkets, but messages from something far more ancient and terrifying than we could ever imagine? This is the story of Eleanor Blackwood, a woman whose simple act of feeding crows led to a discovery so horrifying that it was buried by authorities and forgotten by time. But today, we're going to uncover the truth about what really happened in that quiet neighborhood in Millbrook, Oregon. In 1990-7, Eleanor Blackwood was 63 years old when she first noticed the crows. She had recently moved to Millbrook after her husband's death, seeking solitude in the small town nestled between dense forests and rolling hills. Her house sat at the end of Maple Street, surrounded by towering oak trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. It started innocently enough. Eleanor, lonely and grieving, began throwing scraps of bread and leftover meat into her backyard. Within days, a small murder of crows discovered this reliable food source. At first, there were only 3 or 4 birds, but word travels fast in the corvid world. Within 2 weeks, Eleanor was feeding nearly 20 crows every morning at exactly 7 o'clock. But Eleanor wasn't just any woman. Before retiring, she had been a linguistics professor at the University of Portland, specializing in ancient languages and symbolic communication. Her mind, sharp and analytical, began noticing patterns in the crows, behavior that others might have dismissed as coincidence. The first sign that something was different came 3 weeks after she began feeding them. Eleanor found a small, perfectly round stone on her back porch, placed precisely where she set out the food. The stone was smooth, almost polished, and had what appeared to be scratches on its surface. Eleanor initially dismissed it as random debris, but when she examined it more closely under her magnifying glass, the scratches looked deliberate, almost like primitive writing. Over the following days, more objects appeared. A bent spoon with unusual markings etched into the handle. A piece of bark with symbols carved so deeply they seemed to have been burned in. Child's toy soldier with its face deliberately scratched away and replaced with a crude symbol that made Eleanor's blood run cold. Eleanor began documenting everything. She photographed each object, noting the time and location where it was found. She started a journal, meticulously recording the crows' behavior, their arrival and departure, times, and any unusual sounds they made. What she discovered would have been dismissed by any rational person as the delusions of a lonely widow. But Eleanor's academic background gave weight to her observations. The crows were organizing themselves in ways that defied natural behavior. They would arrive in specific formations, always with the same large crow leading the group. This crow, which Eleanor named Corvus, seemed to be directing the others with a series of calls that followed complex patterns. Eleanor, with her background in linguistics, began to recognize these patterns as rudimentary syntax, but it was the objects that truly terrified her. After 2 months of feeding the crows, Eleanor had collected 47 items, each more disturbing than the last. The symbols carved into them weren't random scratches. They were consistent, repeating patterns that Eleanor recognized from her studies of pre-Celtic runic systems. The breakthrough came on a cold October morning. Eleanor was setting out the usual mixture of meat scraps and dried corn when landed just 3 feet away from her and began making a sound she had never heard from a crow before. It wasn't a caw or a croak, but something that sounded almost like human speech. The sound was guttural and harsh, but unmistakably resembled the word Eleanor. Eleanor's hands began shaking as she slowly backed toward her house. But Corvus wasn't finished. The bird tilted its head and made another sound, hungry, then another, more. Eleanor ran inside and locked the door, her heart pounding. She watched from her kitchen window as the murder of crows gathered in her backyard, all of them staring at the house with an intelligence that seemed almost human. They remained there for 3 hours, silent and motionless, before finally dispersing. That night, Eleanor made a decision that would seal her fate. She decided to try communicating back. The next morning, she approached the feeding area cautiously. The crows were already there, waiting. Corvus hopped closer and repeated the words from the previous day. "Eleanor, hungry more?" Eleanor cleared her throat and spoke slowly. "Hello, Corvus." The effect was immediate. Every crow in the yard turned to look at her with perfect synchronization. Corvus tilted its head and made a new sound, something that sounded like laughter, but with an edge of something darker. Over the following weeks, the conversations became more complex. The crow's vocabulary expanded rapidly, and they began using words Eleanor was certain she had never spoken aloud. They knew her dead husband's name, Robert. They knew about her daughter who had died in a car accident 20 years earlier. They knew things about her past that no living person could possibly know. But the most disturbing development was what Eleanor began to understand about the objects they brought her. The symbols weren't just random ancient markings. They were a form of writing, and as Eleanor decoded more of them, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The symbols told a story about a pact made centuries ago between the crows of the region and something Eleanor's rational mind refused to accept. The symbols spoke of an entity that lived in the spaces between the trees, something that had been feeding off human consciousness for generations. The crows weren't just intelligent birds that had learned to mimic speech. They were messengers, conduits for something far older and more malevolent. Eleanor's journal entries from this period reveal a woman teetering on the edge of sanity. She wrote about dreams where she was flying above the town, seeing through the eyes of the crows. She described visions of the forest floor, carpeted with human bones, and shadows that moved independently of any light source. Most disturbing of all, she began to understand that the crows hadn't learned to speak from her. They had been speaking all along, waiting for someone with the knowledge to understand them. The final entry in Eleanor's journal was dated November 13th, 19. It consisted of only one line, written in symbols that matched those carved into the objects the crows had brought her. "I understand now. The feeding was never about the food." Eleanor Blackwood disappeared that same night. When neighbors noticed that her lights had been on for 3 days straight, police conducted a welfare check. They found the house empty, with no signs of struggle or forced entry. Eleanor's car was still in the driveway, her purse and wallet untouched. The only unusual finding was in her backyard, where they discovered 47 strange objects, arranged in a perfect circle around the area where she had been feeding the crows. The objects were catalogued as evidence, but quickly disappeared from the police storage facility under mysterious circumstances. The official report stated that Eleanor had likely suffered a mental breakdown and wandered into the surrounding forest, where she presumably died of exposure. Her body was never found. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months after Eleanor's disappearance, residents of Maple Street began reporting unusual crow behavior. The birds would gather in large groups, staring at houses with what witnesses described as unsettling intelligence. Children complained of crows following them to school, and several residents reported finding strange objects in their yards. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 2 houses down from Eleanor's former home, started finding small stones with carved symbols on her porch. When she threw them away, they would reappear the next morning. The symbols were always the same, and when Mrs. Henderson showed them to her grandson, who was studying archaeology at the university, he turned pale and advised her to move away immediately. The town of Millbrook began experiencing what officials termed a corvid overpopulation problem. The number of crows in the area had increased exponentially, and their behavior was becoming increasingly aggressive. They would steal shiny objects from residents, gather in groups of hundreds, and make sounds that some witnesses swore sounded like human speech. Dr. Margaret Shaw, an ornithologist from Oregon State University, was brought in to study the phenomenon. Her preliminary findings were never published. Dr. Shaw left Millbrook after just 2 weeks, refusing to discuss her observations and requesting a transfer to another research facility. Colleagues reported that she had developed an extreme phobia of birds and would panic at the sight of even small songbirds. The truth about what Dr. Shaw discovered was leaked years later by a graduate student who had access to her field notes. According to these notes, the crows in Millbrook exhibited cognitive abilities that shouldn't exist in nature. They demonstrated complex problem-solving skills, appeared to have developed their own rudimentary written language using symbols carved into objects, and most disturbing of all, seemed to possess knowledge about the personal lives of town residents that they couldn't have acquired through normal observation. Dr. Shaw's final note, written in increasingly erratic handwriting, stated, "They're not just intelligent, they're connected to something that uses them to watch, to learn, to feed." Eleanor Blackwood didn't disappear. She was chosen. And I fear that others will follow. Local authorities, faced with mounting evidence that something genuinely abnormal was occurring, made a decision that remains controversial to this day. They implemented a program to systematically remove the crow population from Millbrook through methods that were never made public. Over the course of 6 months, the crow population in the area dropped to nearly zero. The strange occurrences stopped immediately. No more carved objects appeared in yards. No more reports of crows exhibiting unusual behavior. The official explanation was that the birds had simply migrated to other areas due to seasonal changes. But residents who lived through those months tell a different story. They speak of nights filled with the sound of gunfire and the smell of burning feathers. They describe trucks arriving in the early morning hours to haul away what looked like industrial-sized garbage bags. Eleanor's house remained empty for 3 years before being demolished. The official reason given was structural damage, but neighbors reported that construction workers refused to enter the building after the first day, claiming they heard voices coming from the walls. The house was ultimately torn down by a crew from out of state who completed the job in record time and left immediately afterward. Today, the lot where Eleanor's house once stood remains empty. Grass grows there now, but residents note that it grows in a perfect circle, matching the pattern of the 47 objects found in Eleanor's backyard. No birds of any kind will land in that circle. Even during migration seasons, when the sky is filled with various bird species, they will fly around that specific spot as if it doesn't exist. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this story is what happened to the other residents of Maple Street in the years following these events. Of the 14 families who lived on the street during Eleanor's time there, 9 have since reported having family members develop what doctors diagnosed as severe schizophrenia or early-onset dementia. The symptoms are always the same. The affected individuals claim they can understand the language of birds and report seeing symbols carved into random objects that others cannot see. Mrs. Henderson, who found the carved stones after Eleanor's disappearance, spent her final years in a care facility, insisting that the crows were still watching her and waiting for their next meal. Her grandson, the archaeology student who had advised her to move, dropped out of his program and became a recluse after finding similar symbols in his own apartment in Portland, over 200 miles away. The official records of Eleanor Blackwood's case were sealed in 2001 under a rarely used statute related to public safety and ongoing investigations. Requests for information are consistently denied, and the few researchers who have attempted to investigate the incident have reported experiencing what they describe as persistent surveillance by large groups of crows. Dr. Elena Martinez, a paranormal researcher who visited Millbrook in 2015, managed to interview several residents before abruptly leaving town. Her research notes, which were published posthumously after her death in a car accident 6 months later, contained a disturbing revelation. According to Dr. Martinez, at least 3 current residents of Millbrook have been found with collections of carved objects similar to those discovered at Eleanor's home. These residents claim the objects simply appear in their yards, always arranged in specific patterns, always bearing the same symbols that Eleanor had been documenting. The pattern suggests that whatever Eleanor discovered is still active, still searching for the right person to serve as its next conduit. The crows may be gone from Millbrook, but the intelligence behind them remains. patient and persistent, waiting for another lonely soul to offer it a daily meal. What makes this story particularly terrifying is that it's not unique to Millbrook. Similar reports have surfaced from small towns across the Pacific Northwest. Always the same pattern: a lonely resident begins feeding crows. The birds begin exhibiting unusual intelligence, carved objects appear, and then the person vanishes. Authorities consistently dismiss these cases as coincidences or hoaxes, but the pattern is too specific, too consistent to be random. Eleanor Blackwood's story serves as a warning about the thin line between loneliness and madness, between curiosity and obsession. It reminds us that intelligence exists in forms we may not recognize, and that not all communication is benevolent. Sometimes, the kindness we show to the world around us opens doors that should remain forever closed. The next time you see a crow watching you with what seems like unusual interest, remember Eleanor Blackwood. Remember that intelligence is not always a gift, and that some hungers can never be satisfied, no matter how much we feed them. And if you ever find strange objects appearing in your yard, objects carved with symbols that seem to whisper secrets in languages older than human civilization, do not try to decode them. Do not document them. Do not seek to understand what they mean, because understanding, as Eleanor discovered, is not always enlightenment. Sometimes, understanding is the first step toward becoming the very thing you sought to comprehend. The crows are still out there, somewhere, watching and waiting. And they remember every kindness, every crumb, every soul who dared to listen to their ancient song. Eleanor Blackwood fed them until they spoke. But in the end, it wasn't her voice that mattered. It was theirs. And now, their hunger has grown beyond what any one person can satisfy. They're looking for their next meal,